Welcome to today's webinar. County Health Rankings and Roadmaps is a program of the University of Wisconsin Population Health Institute with support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. This webinar is produced in collaboration with Healthy Places by Design. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Daejeop since time immemorial. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. This webinar will be recorded. All speakers' views are their own. Guest bios and slides from today's webinar are available on our resource page. We will share a link to the resource page when the webinar begins. Stay up to date on all things CHR&R. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter by scanning this QR code with your phone's camera. It's the best way to find out about upcoming webinars, our podcast, and our latest tools and resources. Your facilitators today include our host, Erica Burrows-Girardi, with support from CHR&R Communication Specialist, Tommy Jaime, and the Collaborative Learning Director from Healthy Places by Design, Joanne Lee. We invite you to continue the conversation immediately after the webinar in our discussion group. Joanne Lee will be our lead facilitator. And watch for a chat from Tommy for details on how to join the group after the webinar.
Hi, and welcome to Healing Trauma for Better Health. My name is Erica Burrows-Girardi, and I am the Senior Outreach Specialist at County Health Rankings and Roadmaps. Today, what we're going to hear is going to be inspiring and hopeful, and so I hope you will enjoy today's webinar. Here at County Health Rankings and Roadmaps, we hold the belief that we work together to repair and heal past and current harms of systems of oppression. And we ask that you join us in this process of healing communities and populations who have been hurt and are continuing to be hurt. We also ask that you join us in collective healing. And to do that, we will start with uncovering some hard truths, unsettling truths. And we do this because, at least here in my household, we have this saying that says, you can't heal what you won't reveal. And so today, I'm asking that you enter this space with us, knowing that we will unearth some trauma, some pain, but we do this so we can move forward with healing. And if there is some discomfort, and I admit they probably will be, I'll have some discomfort as well, lean into it because that's how we grow and that's how we heal. So as usual, our amazing production team is alongside me to help us on this journey. And I want to start by introducing you to Joanne Lee.
Hello, Erica, to you and everybody who has graced us with their presence for today's webinar. Really excited to hear from our presenter. Folks out there today in this webinar, my role is to monitor the Q&A box. So if you haven't already, go ahead and click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That way, anytime questions come to mind, feel free to enter them in the Q&A box. I'm going to be monitoring that throughout the webinar, and we'll be gathering the most common questions or the ones for our presenters to address at the end of the webinar. I'll also be looking forward to seeing some of you who will be joining us for the post-webinar discussion group, and you'll get more details about that a little bit later. Right now, I want to introduce you all to Tommy Jaime. He is going to be monitoring the chat box, and he'll tell you a little bit more about how to engage with us using that feature. Hi, Tommy.
Hey, Joanne, thanks. And hi, everyone out there. I'm excited to be here with you all for today's webinar. And like Joanne said, I'll be kind of managing the chat function today. I'll be there in the chat box. So when you're chatting, please be sure that you use the drop-down box and that you choose chat to everybody or chat to everyone before you send your message. And then that way everyone can see your chat. And again, if you have a question, please be sure to place that in the Q&A box where Joanne will help you out. Next up, I'd like to introduce James Lloyd. James is a colleague here at County Health Rankings and Roadmaps, and he'll be helping with technology. So if you have any tech issues during the webinar, he'd be the one to help you out with that, and you would want to let us know in the chat. Hey, James.
Hey, thank you, Tommy. I just am always amazed at my opportunity to be able to help support this program. The topics we work on are fantastic. And as Tommy said, I'll keep an eye on chat. And if there's anything I can see that I might do technologically to help out, I am there to do that. Erica, back to you.
Thank you so much, James. And thank you to the entire production team. You guys are amazing. I'm going to ask you just spend a couple of more moments with me. I just want to kind of do some level setting, and I'm going to ask that you close your eyes because I'm going to take you on a little bit of imagery journey here. But I want you to imagine that the land where your home is located has been confiscated. Like you leave work today, right? And you go home, and there are signs posted that says that where you live, the land that you have lived on for years, and quite frankly, maybe your family's lived there for generations, now belong to someone else. You have to move, and you must move immediately. You take the few possessions that you can carry with you, um, maybe put into the trunk of your car, and you leave. Imagine that the language that you speak, the language that is spoken in your community, perhaps in your state, even region, and has been spoken again for countless generations, is now banned. And if you're caught speaking your native language, you can be punished. Imagine being forbidden from practicing cultural traditions, Thanksgiving dinners, 4th of July barbecues, Sweet 16 parties, or here in Central Florida where I live, the quinceañeras. You're not even allowed to participate in your worship services. And to add insult to injury, your response to the trauma you experience from all of these injustices may even be punishable by law. So your community or your family may be labeled troublemakers or even enemies because you did not follow the policies that are now stripping you of your cultural identity. So I know that this may be hard to wrap your head around. For some of you, you may not be able to imagine this. However, these are the policies and practices that were grounded in colonization. These colonizing or colonial policies supported what eventually became the United States. And throughout our nation's history, many populations experienced cultural identity stripping, including people of color and indigenous land, the people who were indigenous to this land. And as you know, Africans were forced into enslavement here, and they also had to weather cultural stripping. So I'm only scratching the surface here, and it's important to name the fact that these unjust policies were allowed because there were people who were benefiting from them, people who have accumulated wealth through generations since then because of these policies. And what's more troubling is that historical injustices lead to unhealthy outcomes, not just for their generation experiencing the injustice, but for generations to come. So some of you might recognize this image, and if you haven't opened your eyes yet, you can. This is the County Health Rankings model. The model displays the many factors that you see in blue boxes, and those factors influence how long we live, and you see that shown in the green boxes. Policies and programs actually influence those health factors, and then ultimately those health factors will influence your health outcomes. So think about the policies that aim to keep us safe. Things like food inspections, traffic laws, public education, just to name a few, that all of which I'm very grateful for. Now, what happens if those policies or programs are unjust or unfair? When those policies, when created, were grounded in racism or oppression, when systematic or systemic rather, and unjust policies and practices deny opportunities to a quality education, safe and secure housing, safe drinking water, livable wages, or quality health care. What happens when these unjust policies deny practice of time-honored community and familial traditions? The result is these communities and populations struggle to thrive because for generations they were denied these opportunities that were made available to others. Now, again, this can be hard to hear, it's hard to fathom, and believe me, what I've laid out here only scratches the surface of the trauma that our Indigenous brothers and sisters have had to weather through for generations. Indigenous people and other populations, primary people of color, have experienced similar generational trauma. The good news is we have the power to change this. We have the power to heal and to thrive. And healing is just not for groups that have been oppressed. Healing is for all of us. So I want to take you back to this belief that we have here at CHRNR. We, that means you, that means I, we work together to repair and heal from past and current harms of systems of oppression. And that is why I am excited to introduce you to our distinguished guest, Tatewin Means, who has devoted her life to healing her community. Please join me in welcoming Tatewin Means, the Executive Director of Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation. Hi, Tatewin.
Hello, it's good to be here. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm going to say a little bit about Lisa, then we're going to circle back to you. So the one thing I want to mention is that Lisa Wade, who is the executive director of the Chickalhoun Village Council in Alaska, was also scheduled to join us on the panel today. Unfortunately, Lisa is sick. I talked to her today, and trust me, she was not going to be able to make it. I could barely recognize her voice. So want you to join me in sending her well wishes. Lisa was very disappointed, but again, she really was ill, and so she has agreed to schedule a short interview with us later this year, and then we can share the story of her village with you. So anyone who has registered for this webinar will get more information about that when that recording is ready. So to learn more about our guests and read their bios, take a look at our webinar resource page. Tommy's chatting the link now. He's probably already chatted out earlier, but make sure you go to that, grab their bios because these are some impressive women. And I'm also excited to say that both Chickalhoun Village and Thunder Valley are recipients of the Distinguished RWJF Culture of Health Prize. And you can learn more about their communities and the prize by viewing their summary videos, which will be included on your webinar resource guide, and that will be shared with you tomorrow. So today we're going to learn some new terms when we hear from Tatewin, and we're going to learn about some new practices rooted in cultural regeneration and healing. What we will learn today can be applied to any community engaged in healing. So here are some questions that I hope we're going to be able to explore. How are some of these communities responding to racism as a part of their healing work? How do we indigenize systems and policies? And how are the ideas of liberation and self-determination connected to health and healing? And I hope that sounds really good to you. It sounds good to me, and that's the reason why I want to invite you to continue this discussion following the webinar. During the video intro, you heard about our discussion groups that follow the webinar, and they're facilitated by Joanne Lee. They're always engaging. They give you the opportunity to share what you're doing in your community and to learn from others. So I'm hoping that you will be able to join us. Tommy is going to chat out a link that will give you more information. Let me get it out. He's going to chat out more information and a link to the discussion group later toward the end of the webinar. And again, if you have any time to spare, please join us. I know Tatewin is going to be able to join us for at least part of the discussion. She's a very busy lady, but she's carving out some time for us. So I really appreciate her. Let's get started. Tatewin, I want to just start by, again, welcoming you and asking you to share a little bit about your community.
Absolutely. Iuha chante washana betu sapi hatu dopanaji means amachiapi dayaya hipi sasito Dakota na Oglála Lakota wia hemacha Oglála Lakota hemata. Greetings, relatives. I shake each of your hands virtually with a good heart. My full name is actually Tatewin Dopanajiwi, which means the woman that stands with the four directions. It was my paternal grandmother's name, and so I'm very honored to carry that name. But for short, for a shortened version, Tatewin is what I'm most commonly known by, and I come from you from Oglála territory in the lands of the Oceti Nation of what is now called in colonizer terms Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which is one of the 9 tribal nations within South Dakota. So that's where I come to you. That's my homelands. I am Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota and Ogala Lakota. My mother's Sisseton Wahpeton, all a part of the Oceti Nation. And it's an honor to be here with you today. I'm proudly represent our communities and the work that we do here at Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation. And I thank you. I thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
You can go to the next slide.
Okay.
I just wanted to provide some background or some context to this conversation and to the work that we do at Thunder Valley, because a lot of times many people don't even know that Indigenous people on this land base, what we call Turtle Island, is that we still exist. Many see us as relics of the past, things you see in old Western movies, or really stereotypical mystical beings that are one with nature and the land and all of these things. And while some of those underlying beliefs and philosophies are true, it's a romanticized view of us, or a very stereotypical dehumanized view, as you see with mascots and so on and so forth. And so to really understand the scope and the depth of the work that we do here at Thunder Valley, it's important to understand the history of Indigenous people and the history of our specific nations. You know, there are over 570 plus federally recognized Indigenous nations here within this land base. And even more that are seeking that federal recognition. Because of all of these racist policies that you see listed here, many tribes were terminated. There was a certain era of US policy that was about terminating the entire nation of these different Indigenous groups. And so there are many groups, one particular, the Lumbee of North Carolina, fighting to be recognized as a separate sovereign, as a political entity and its own nation after those were stripped by force by the United States government. And so you see these racist periods from the treaty, from the original Papal Bull that started the doctrine of discovery here in the United States, which actually condoned and supported the colonization, the enslavement, the conversion of Indigenous people to Christianity. So the Catholic Church and the United States government have been hand in hand in our active genocide and assimilation attempts since first contact, since the 1400s. So as you can see here, all of these different eras of formal policy, a formal law and policy of the United States have had some really detrimental impacts to our communities. And many of those societal effects from these eras are visible today. Whether you hear about the tremendous health disparities, the justice system disparities, the disproportionate representation that our people have per capita in this justice, what they call a justice system, It's all ties back to these eras.
Mhm.
There was a treaty making era with Indigenous people. Many of those have been violated and continue to be violated to this day. You may have heard of land back movement. That's been a really popular trending topic, especially in Indigenous media and conversations, because of this effort to finally have the US uphold its own laws, its own constitution, with Article 6 of the Constitution saying treaties are the supreme law of the land. So how are we holding the US accountable to honoring their word and their commitment through these really formal legal instruments that they designed and created many years ago?
Mhm.
Some of these eras are really harmful and have had those devastating health impacts. The boarding school era, the assimilation, allotment and assimilation area, is when they literally stole our children to be placed in Catholic boarding schools across this country, but also into Canada with the First Nations people there. And you may have heard that the Pope recently issued an acknowledgement and apology for the Catholic Church's role in that theft and abuse and death of many Indigenous children. And so these are the things that we at Thunder Valley have to overcome, that our community members have to overcome. Hundreds of years of intentional genocide by the United States government. And so
And I see that this latest phase of self-determination, can you tell us a little bit about that one? That's
right,
happened, that kind of started in 61.
So when all of the civil rights movements, the racial justice movements that were happening in the 60s and 70s, Indigenous people were very much a part of that. The American Indian movement was really active during these times in bringing to light the issues and the injustices that the Indigenous people of this land, the first people of this land, were facing at the time. And until then, it was not in the public consciousness. And so we give great thanks to those of our relatives that were able to sacrifice their lives in many instances to bring attention to what we are facing. My father is the late Russell Means, and he was a part of the American Indian movement, a part of the takeover at Wounded Knee in 1973. And if you're not aware of any of these terms, I would really encourage you to learn this Indigenous history, because it's the original history of this land base that we are all guests to. But even more so all of you, because you came here as visitors, and these are not things that are taught in school, not even in places like South Dakota, where there are 9 tribal nations and we're the largest minority in the state. You don't hear these kinds of truths. And that leads to the perpetuation of the stereotypes, of the dehumanization, and all of these really harmful things. So when Erica spoke of the need for everyone to heal, it's absolutely true. White people themselves need to heal from colonization and the effects of it, and those that have benefited from it and those who have suffered from it. So I just like to open with this to give an idea of the extensive history that we are overcoming every day in the work that we do at Thunder Valley.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because you're absolutely right. I mean, I may have learned 1 or 2 of these. I do remember like the removal part. We learned about that, Andrew Jackson but the rest of these eras and the things that happen, I don't remember learning these. So I just want to remind everybody that this is in the slide deck, that we have a PDF too. Again, you can go to that link on the resource page on our website, and go ahead and download these slides, so you'll have these notes from Tatewin, and you can go back and do some research. And so Tatewin, I want to say that this tree, which is really pretty, it has all these beautiful roots and leaves to it. I want you to tell us a little bit about it, but it reminds me of what I've been learning. We here at the UW, a lot of us are taking a class about Indigenous culture, and it reminds me of some of the symbolism I've seen in that class. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So we at Thunder Valley envision a liberated Lakota nation. So that's what we're fighting for, is the liberation of our people, for our people to find that self-liberation, that freedom within themselves and their families, but then our collective liberation too. And we're working our way through that. Nobody knows or has a prescribed method of how to liberate. There's no handbook on how to heal and liberate. But what we come to know in this work is that the first step of that liberation has to be healing ourselves and our spirits from colonization, from those chains of colonization that still bind us. And that's what we see. You know, we're prisoners to that colonization and the mindset and the ideologies that it carried with it, those really harmful ideologies of the colonizer. How do we heal ourselves from that so that we're not using the same language, so that we're having that different outlook that's grounded first in Lakota thought and philosophy. And so what this tree represents is our approach, our liberation approach for our community specifically. As you can see, the roots of the tree, that's our community. That's our Oyate means our people, our nation. Okay. And the buffalo is our relative. In our creation stories, we come from the Buffalo Nation. And so they are very sacred to us. And hence the reason why the United States government killed them, nearly brought them to extinction, you know, over 100 years ago, because they were our life source. As Indigenous people. And so there are many, many efforts, including our own, to bring back our bison relatives to our communities so that we can make those connections again. But that is what brings to life this work, our people. It's who we do this work for, and it's why we are here. The trunk of that tree is our Lifeways and Wellness equity work. So we have 8 initiatives, and those are the branches that you see. Our 8 initiatives work in this whole community approach, a really holistic way in addressing Indigenous determinants of health across our communities. So we're taking it a step beyond social determinants of health and really looking at a more expansive picture of Indigenous determinants of health. How does racism affect our health outcomes? How does access to our language and lifeways positively impact our health outcomes? You know, so taking a broader view of all of these factors that we know inherently and instinctually that they impact our health and our way of life. And so this Lifeways and Wellness equity work isn't an initiative, right? A lot of times when you see work done, especially in communities of color, culture is an add-on. It's an afterthought. It's, well, we should sprinkle in some culture. Let's dab in some art. Let's dab in some music. Whereas as a Lakota perspective and that Lakota first mentality, it's how do we ground our work and support it at its base, a Lakota ideology, our Lakota way of life. And that's a tremendous challenge because we are all actively healing from colonization, right? We're in that process as we speak. So when we approach a project, when we approach one aspect of our work, we have to continually ask ourselves, is this from a colonized Western approach? Or is this from a Lakota approach? And maybe we're not ready to go completely all Lakota at first. So what does that path look like to get us there? So it's a continual process of iterations to come to this rebalance. I hear a lot of words and narratives around power shifting, building community power, especially in communities of color, for women initiatives. That's colonizer language. The colonizer is the one that introduced this concept of power and control. And when you see people start to lose that power and control, you see it all the time in the political landscape. What do? They lash out, they get angry.
Provoke fear.
And they provoke fear. They want to hoard. This is mine. You're not taking it. And they get really emboldened in their stances. Lakota thought and philosophy is about balance. Everything lives in balance with one another. All living beings, not just mankind, every living being.
And I'm looking at these qualities, Tatewin, like humility, respect, honesty, generosity, wisdom. You know, those qualities in itself build power. And, it's just beautiful to see that that's at the roots of what,
hold on one second. We're not building power. So to finish my thought there, that is a colonized mentality about this building. We don't even have a word for power in that sense in our language. Everything wowash ake means to collectively do something, to do something together, to accomplish something together. It was never about the individual. It's never about individual people having this power and authority over decision. It's about what the collective can do, right? Knowing your role and responsibilities to the whole group and what you carry with you. That is that collective strength. And so, when we think about how these all work together, how are we restoring balance in our community, but also within ourselves? That's healing, right? That's the first step of healing. Something's out of balance. Look at the environment, the climate catastrophe. There's so many things out of balance, and that's why we are in the state that we are in. How do we bring that into balance? Well, one obvious way is we have to dispel everything that colonization has taught us and has brought us, right? We have to totally shift away from that mentality in order for us to truly restore that balance. You can't have balance in a capitalistic society. You can't have balance in a society that values individual wealth and profit at all costs. That's no way going to lead us to balance. And so this approach here is really about a Lakota perspective on how to do that. It's not the only way. It's our way here at Thunder Valley, and we hope that it can inspire the work of other people. But can you go to the next slide, please? This is the, what I want to share now is our organizational video, just so you can see the images and hear from some of our community members about the work that we do.
Thank you. Thanks, James is queuing that up.
This land is who we are. We come from the land. Unchi Ma Khan, Grandmother Earth. She gives us everything we need. Our connection to the earth is just like a connection to our mom, connection to our grandmother.
Because our ancestors lived in nature, they also understood the roles and responsibilities to each other and to the entire Wichoti. The camp is the thing that keeps people together. Being able to be together and to work together is something that our ancestors knew.
Now we will say in Lakota. When we hear that sound, we say slow.
There was a time where Lakota, where indigenous people were almost completely wiped out. But there was always those few that kept the language alive, kept the beliefs, kept the ceremonies, kept the culture, kept all that knowledge alive through everything we faced as a people.
I'm really proud to be Lakota, Dakota, to come from the Oceti Sakowin, because we have a long history, a long legacy of being freedom fighters, proud, patriots, and really come from a place of strength and courage and a relentlessness.
We're taking our own perspective, our own life ways, who we are as Lakota people, and then utilizing that as our tools to move forward to build healthy communities. And from that healthy community, we'll see that perpetuate out into a liberated Lakota nation. It's so important because nobody else can do this for us as Lakota people. We have to be the ones here doing the work.
You can see the beginnings of liberation in our food sovereignty work, in the building of a regenerative community, a building of a regenerative economy, in the building of a liberated workforce through our workforce development program. All of these components, you have the beginnings of this broader liberation movement. We just have to find a really coordinated and systematic way to approach healing. Right? We can't leave people off on their own to figure it out themselves. We want people to come along in this journey of healing and hope and liberation, because that's how we are going to transform our societies for the future. For our community to fully realize that, for individuals to fully realize their own liberation, to find that liberation, it's going to take generations. And so we have to have patience. We're planting the seeds, and 7 generations from now, maybe we'll see a completely different reality, one that is liberated.
What makes me hopeful for the future is the children on our reservation, the children in our families, to know that they have an understanding and identity to who they are, that they're Lakota. They can speak our language without any inhibitions, that they can tell people who they are and be proud, to know that their generation before them has done the work. And so what makes me really hopeful is the children and them really being rooted in their foundation of who we are and to be proud of it.
it's really humbling to know that the start of something that is like formal, such as the CDC, as a nonprofit organization, has such strong spiritual roots, is really fundamental to our identity as an organization. It's what gives us strength, it's what gives us direction, and I think it's really what sets us apart from other organizations, because we're so embedded in those teachings and those life ways and prayers. And we want to invite everybody on this journey of healing, hope, and liberation.
Thank you for sharing that beautiful video, Tatewin. Tell us more.
Yeah. So as you saw in the video, and then in these next slides, you can just go ahead and just scroll through as I'm speaking. It's just images I wanted to share of our work, of our community. One of our 8 initiatives is our Regenerative Community Development Initiative, and that's the image that you're seeing here, actually constructing a regenerative community on the 34 acres of land that we have. We recently acquired an additional 48 acres apart from where we're at now to start a healing community with transitional housing and permanent supportive housing. And the idea is to provide all the resources, whether they're more westernized modalities of healing, substance abuse treatment, those kinds of things, or traditional forms of healing, making that available to those that need those spaces, that need a really intentional space for healing. You know, as a former attorney general, I saw the recidivism rates in our communities extremely high because people have the best of intentions, our community members, of wanting to be sober, wanting to have a different life, but returning to the same environments and cultures that led them to making not so good decisions. And so, you know, as we think about creating spaces, we want to be really intentional about healing spaces so that everyone has access, right? It's an equity issue. And so these images here are of our current development. We have 21 single family homes. If you could go back to the image of the homes, Erica. Yeah, there. So there's 3 circles of 7, what we call tioshpais, and tioshpai in our language means families. So 3 families of 7 homes. And the reason why they are orientated the way they are is because the Oceti Sakowin means 7 council fires. So there are 7 bands within the nation of the Oceti Sakowin. And when we all got together and camped together one time of the year, it's usually during the summertime, every nation of those 7 had a designated area in the camp circle with the opening to the east, and doors, entrances always face the east because it greets the rising sun. And so we've situated our houses in those configurations to reflect who we are as Oceti Sakowin, to reflect how we traditionally situated ourselves, to make those connections again. So you're seeing the applicability, that return to our identity, even in modern infrastructure and construction. When we engage in construction projects, there's extensive community engagement that happens because our people are tired of being told what's best for us. That's the whole idea behind the United States government, is a very paternalistic, racist view of Indigenous people, that we are incompetent and we are able to make decisions for ourselves. That's the very reason why the Bureau of Indian Affairs exists, a whole department to manage the affairs of Indian people of this country. Are you kidding me? It originally started under the Department of Defense because we were a foreign nation, and then got worked into this, the Bureau, the Department of Interior, where the Bureau of Indian Affairs is housed. And I don't know if you know anything about litigation when it comes to Indian nations, but the Bureau of Indian Affairs is always in trouble, always getting sued for mismanagement of our affairs. So they put in this racist department just because we're not competent, but they are worse because they mismanage funds. They're always doing Salazar, Cobell, all of those large multi-million-dollar settlements happen because the Bureau of Indian Affairs is incompetent. So I'm all about the dismantling of those racist, archaic systems that continue to oppress and continue to perpetuate those outdated paternalistic approaches to Indian country. And so, as we engage our community, it's reflective of their voice. When we first said, what do we need? What do you want to see in this community? They said housing. We are deficient 4,000 homes. This is in 2012, 4,000 homes. So the first designs were like end-to-end housing, multifamily housing, all kinds of housing, just end-to-end, as many units as we could fit. We took that back to the community and they said, no, that's not what we want. We want an active community, one that has a multitude of services, so we don't have to drive 90 miles off reservation for a grocery store, where we have to drive 90 miles off reservation for entertainment and recreation. And so that's what we're building, a thriving community where people can live, work, play, interact, socialize, all of the things that any community would want. And so we're raising the standard of what can be expected. We're not going to settle for the scraps anymore. We're tired of begging for the scraps from the colonizer table. We don't want that anymore. So we are raising the standards. We have our own building and design standards. So when outside contractors come into our community, we say, this is the expectation. This is how you will design these buildings. This is how you will approach this project, and not the other way around. A lot of times when you have outside designers, outside consultants come in, they're trying to dictate to you how to implement these projects. And we're saying, no more, not any longer. That's not how we operate. So
is that part of that self-liberation that because I want to make sure we understand the terms.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm saying, speaking back and saying, no, this is not going to work for us. This is what works for us. Is that part of self-liberation? I want to make sure that I understand. That's part of that. Got it. What is this building, this beautiful building we're looking at here?
This is our community center and bunkhouses. So when we have guests or visitors, we have a lot of the traveling nurses that come through our healthcare system that need a place to stay. We have 7 bunk rooms available for rent. In our community center, when we were doing the public engagement, our young people, so Thunder Valley has always been a youth focus.
I want to show that next picture. Look at that, y'all.
So when we did our engagement, they the one thing the youth said is, we don't want any wakes or funerals in this space because we want it to be about life and hope and the future. And every other space across the reservation, you have wakes and funerals because there's just no designated space for it. So even the schools and their gymnasiums have wakes and funerals. There's just no general community spaces for those things. And so that was one thing they said they didn't want. So we've had community gatherings, tribal council meetings, our own, informational sessions with the communities. We've had weddings in there, birthday parties. So the community can rent that space for different things that they want to do within their families. And the design of it, even towards the top, you'll see the wood, and along the bottom, the stone. Traditionally, the teepee was our home. That's not for every Indigenous group now. Not every Indigenous nation had teepees as their homes. And so that's another stereotype, but it was for us, that is something we used as our dwelling. And you would have the wood at the top, and you'd always have an opening to the sky. So along that, you can't see it in here, but the north side, there's a lot of windows towards the sky with the butterfly roof. To reflect that traditional architecture. And then the stones were around the bottom of the teepee as anchors. And so we tried to model that with the stones around the base of our building. We have a 12-unit apartment building. That's a part of the blue building that you see there. And then the single family homes are purchase homes. People acquire mortgages to live there.
I think you can see there's the blue building that you're talking about right there.
Right.
And then I wanted everybody to see this picture of the young folks and with the eggs, and then this one. Having so much fun.
Yeah, so we have a food sovereignty initiative. Obviously, we have a 2.5 acre demonstration farm we raise nearly 500 chickens, in different cycles to provide eggs to community members, to elders, to schools.
Nice.
And then our youth development initiative does a lot of activities around building leadership and resiliency and all of those things with our young people. So middle school and high school ages. This is a glow run that we do annually, a chance to be outside and to have some fun in the evening, in the nighttime.
Yeah.
You can go on to the next one.
Oh, wow, this is
These
beautiful.
next few spaces are our total immersion Montessori. We have 2 sites for birth to 5-year-olds, and they are, we're a part of like the International Montessori Association. We work in partnership with the Montessori Center of Minnesota. We have 2 trained guides in Montessori. One there is Emily that you see in this image. And so at our 2 sites, it's total immersion. So it's our way to reclaim and revitalize our sacred language that was forbidden for many years, as you were saying in the intro. Boarding schools, children are literally beat and tortured for speaking our own language. And so our ways, and this is happening all across Indian country, language revitalization movement is really, really strong. And so you see our young people are reclaiming those lifeways every single day. And it's beautiful to see. It's beautiful and hopeful to hear when they speak to one another in our sacred language. Our word for children is Wakaya, which means sacred beings. And so you have our most sacred, most precious people speaking our sacred language. And, you know, that's why we do this work. It's for them. And so being able to have these spaces where only Lakota is spoken, you wouldn't have thought it was possible, you know, before the 60s and 70s when we fought for that right. When people literally died for that right. You know, in 1978, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed. They actually had to pass federal law to say it was okay for us to practice our way of life, because people were imprisoned, they were killed for doing so, for being Lakota. And so to see this come full circle back, you know, this is a playground that's currently under construction. You see some pieces there, but the shape of this playground is for our Black Hills, our sacred Black Hills, the Chesapa. Our 7 sacred sites are located in there. And when completed, the 7 structures, the play structures, will represent a sacred site, so that when young people and their families come, they learn about those sacred sites as they're interacting, as they're playing. And it's in the shape of the Black Hills. When you ever look at the Black Hills of what is South Dakota, it's in the shape of a heart. It's the heart of our people and our nation, and that's why it's so sacred to us. So when we talk about land back, we talk about treaty violations, that's the most egregious. And in fact, in a 1980 court case, the United States, Sioux Nation versus the United States, the Supreme Court found in our favor that it was an illegal taking. But their remedy, of course, which is most often in a lot of cases that get litigated, is monetary. And to this day, this was from 1980 to this day, no member of the Oceti Sakowin Nation has taken that money, because we've always said it's not about the money, it's about a return of the land. So when you hear about Mount Rushmore and people protesting, I hope that none of you will ever go to Mount Rushmore, because it is it's so insulting and disrespectful to have 4 racist white men carved into our sacred Black Hills. You know, who had very racist Indian policies, who were slave owners, you know, who did very harmful things to Indigenous people and Black people. And so we do not celebrate Mount Rushmore. We want all of that returned. And so that's why we do this. It's for the future generation, to ensure that they have our way of life.
Tatewin, I can't thank you enough. I did something very bad, which is sneak into the chat, which I normally don't do. But I mean, the chat is just blowing up. I mean, people are so grateful for what you have shared. And I'm so glad you're going to be able to spend a few moments with us in the discussion group. I'm going to ask James to launch a poll right now, because I want you to think about the things that Tatewin said. She talked about reclaiming language, this idea of self-liberation, where you as a community member saying, this is what works for me, not what you think works for me. I'm going to say what works for me. Reclaiming language, reclaiming cultural lifeways. I want you to think about those strategies and see if those are strategies that you think you could use in your community. If so, let us know. Fill out the poll. Also, chat to Tommy what challenges do you think you would have with a self-liberation approach? I'm curious about that. So if you would chat that, and James, you can go ahead and close the poll in about 5 seconds. I'm going to let you count it down yourself because I'm going to actually turn to Joanne right now to see what questions we've had popping up. Joanne?
Thank you so much, Erica and Tatewin. So you definitely have people thinking, you've got their gears going, which is exactly what we wanted, Tatewin. And I am hoping to at least get 2 questions off during the webinar, but want to encourage folks to come to the discussion group where you will be able to join us for just a little bit. So Tatewin, I'm going to dive right in. When you were sharing so beautifully about the community and how it's being developed, and a lot of folks had questions about the land and wanted to know, what was the process for acquiring the land? What did that effort take? Were there any challenges related to that?
Do you mean Thunder Valley's property?
Yes.
So we have fee simple land, and that was purchased from a homeowner, a landowner who's Oglála, and back in around 2010, 2011, and so that was just a private purchase. Reservations, especially in South Dakota, you'll find a mix of fee simple land, in which you can own outright title. But a majority of it is trust land. So again, continuing with that very paternalistic view of Indigenous people, Indian people can't own their ancestral lands that have been inherited or passed down through generations outright. The title, the legal title, is held in trust by the United States government, by the Department of Interior. And so all of the trust land or allotted land to individuals, it's managed by the Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so that was a conscious decision then. I was not a part of Thunder Valley then, but a very conscious decision to make sure we could own that title and not have to deal with the bureaucracy of the BIA, of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so it was a purchase, and the same with White Clay, the healing community that I talked about in White Clay, Nebraska. It's fee simple, so it was a private sale that we acquired that property as well. As we expand, the next projects coming up will be a school, a total immersion Montessori school, and to do that, we need some more space. And so, the possibilities of acquiring allotted land or trust land, it's a part of the conversation because land is so limited in our area, but it just, it adds extra challenges when you have to work those kinds of agreements out through the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Right. I really appreciate you, Tatewin, for these are things that many well-intentioned folks, including in our audience, just don't know, and so but yet it's part of your everyday life, right? And it's something that is part of your history. So you're definitely educating us and doing it very graciously. So I'm going to move to one more question. You really got you really hit the point home for people about being very careful about the language you use, like around power, right? And so folks are asking, with they're saying, framing it, with respect, how should non-Indigenous people make an effort to help the situation and not offend? Another related question is, when you said something along the lines of healing from colonization is for white people too, where do we start? Basically, non-Indigenous folks in our audience are asking, where do we start? What do you recommend in terms of resources or just the first couple of steps?
I think starting with learning the Indigenous history of this land. What the United States did to us is the original sin of this country. And so learning that truth, that history, is absolutely important of being an occupant of this land. Because in learning that history, you're going to learn about how Indigenous peoples lived in balance with the land, how we protected it, how we cared for it and gave back to the land, right? In all the different parts of Turtle Island. So we call it Turtle Island, which includes Canada, United States, down into Central America. How that happened and how it looked. And so really taking the lead from Indigenous people on how to restore that balance with the land itself. And so, and learning Indigenous history is absolutely important. And wherever you currently occupy, learning the specific history of that region, of the Indigenous peoples there, meeting them, taking the time to reach out to the different groups, individuals, organizations, and learning about their efforts and how you may or may not be able to support. You know, what we say all the time, we ask that, how do we support the work? Well, one, educating yourself, learning that history, it's absolutely important. Having those conversations within your circles, within your family, your extended families, your friend groups, because that's how we cause that ripple effect that my colleague Lynn Cooney said in the video. She's our deputy director. That's how you create those ripple effects of the mindset shifts within your own circles. To have these conversations that you never had before in schools. Yeah. And so I think those are starting points, and then actually visiting places. Obviously, supporting Indigenous-led efforts is important through donations, through in-kind support, whatever that may be. But what's even more important, as our board member said, giving that is from your mind. Anyone can do that. Anyone can give money. But making a connection from your heart, from your spirit to the place, to the people, that is much more meaningful. It's stronger, that connection. So inviting people to come here, or finding those places that it's okay to go in the areas you are, that's how you make those connections to the land and to the people. And so that's what I would encourage as first steps. And it will be hard. Like, this process of healing, tremendously hard, as many of you know, as practitioners, as people that do the work, but also being really honest with your own self-reflection on how your family came to be here, how your family acquired the land it did. I heard of in the Seattle area, landowners actually paying a property tax to the Indigenous nations in the Seattle area rather than to the state, to the county, right? In ways like that, I've heard of individuals handing titles over to the Indigenous people of that land and paying a lease to them, paying a rent to them. There are active things, really simple things that can be done to support Indigenous people in that. So I would just encourage you to be brave and bold in those steps, because it's going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of hard conversations, even within your own families. And but because of our numbers, because of the genocide, we need allies to do those kinds of things and to partner with us in that.
It's great and important advice, Tatewin, and also underscore that it's a lifelong process you commit to be an ally. It's not you've learned something from there. So thank you so much, Erica. I know we have to move on. There are questions in the Q&A. I'm so sorry, folks, we didn't get a chance to get to, but we do have the post-webinar discussion group. But I just want to encourage folks that, you know, Tatewin can only be with us for a portion of the discussion group. And so we're going to call on you all to share how this is resonating with you and what might be going on in your own communities in terms of Indigenous communities and healing.
Really quick, I see everyone's messages in the chat. Thank you for all of the encouraging words. It does mean a lot. I am reading them. I want to reply to a lot of them, but I'm like, wait, I better pay attention. But no, I see a lot of the questions too in the Q&A, and the Red Nation. Nick Estes is a really good friend of mine, and he is a part of that group. And so, I mean, just supporting them, not any formal working relationships or anything. But yeah, I'm really humbled and honored by all of you being here and sharing your words of encouragement and support. Oglála.
Thank you so much, Tatewin. And I certainly appreciate you. And you all might have seen me bounce off of Zoom. We were having some Zoom issues, so I'm a little afraid to share my screen, but hopefully you can see this. I want to tell you about next month's webinar, and then I know that Tommy's also sending out the link to our evaluation. So just want to ask you to please complete that evaluation. But I'm not sure if you noticed, but on average, women are paid just 80 cents for every dollar that a man earns. And so the gender pay gap really affects our emotional health, all of our physical health. It also hurts the economy. So I want you to join us next month, because we're going to be digging into the gender pay gap and what that means for your health. We're going to be joined by these two beautiful ladies from YWCA San Antonio, Misty Hardy and Corinne Reyes. So please make time to join that. You'll get more information about how you can connect to that webinar on September 27th. And hey, sometimes I don't get a chance to see a lot of you in person, but I will if you are able to come to the Radically Rural Summit or APHA. So County Health Rankings and Roadmaps, specifically I, will be at both of these events. So do plan to come. Also, Tommy's now chatting out the link to the discussion group. Joanne's already hopped off to open up the discussion group room. So go ahead and join over there right now. Tate will be joining us as well, at least for the first part. I want to remind you all to stay connected to us. We have a presence on social media. And don't forget about our new podcast that Tommy's the executive producer of. Please make sure that you tune into that wherever you listen to your podcast. And I want to give a special thanks again to Tatewin Means for her wisdom today. And I want to give a special thanks to my production team, especially Tommy Jaime, whom I love very much. Thank you so much, Tommy, for everything that you have done for our webinars and for our podcast. And I'll see you all next month and in the discussion group. Have a good afternoon.